So, I've got something super cool for you today, Emma. Like, you're not going to believe the story we're diving into.
Oh my God, yes. I've been absolutely buzzing to talk about this one. We're covering one of the most fascinating figures in tech history, and I genuinely can't wait to share all the details.
For our Behind the Billions listeners, we're talking about someone who went from being given up for adoption as a baby to becoming like one of the wealthiest people on the planet.
Exactly. We're diving into the incredible story of Larry Ellison, the Oracle guy. And trust me, this story has everything from starting a company with just $2,000 to literally buying most of a Hawaiian island.
I've heard you've got some really interesting details about his early life that most people don't know about.
Oh, you bet I do. And what's really fascinating is how this kid who didn't even know his biological parents ended up becoming this total tech industry titan. We're talking about someone worth over $200 billion right now,
That's just, absolutely mind-blowing when you think about it.
right? And trust me, the way he got there is even more fascinating than the numbers. And I've got all the details ready to share.
So, Emma, let's start at the beginning. What exactly happened when Larry was born?
Oh my God. Okay. So this is actually such a fascinating part of his story. So Larry was born in New York City in 1944, and his birth mother was this young Jewish woman named Florence Spellman. And you know what's really interesting? His biological father was actually an Italian-American Air Force pilot.
Wait, so what happened then? Because I know he didn't grow up with his birth parents.
Right. So here's where it gets really emotional. When Larry was just 9 months old, he got really sick with pneumonia, and his mother, she made this incredibly difficult decision to give him to her aunt and uncle to adopt. Can you imagine how hard that must have been?
Did he ever, get to meet his birth mother later in life?
He actually didn't meet her until he was 48 years old. But the really interesting part is about his life growing up in Chicago's South Shore. His adoptive mother, Lillian, was apparently this really warm, loving person. But his relationship with his adoptive father, Louis, was totally different.
How so?
So Louis Ellison, he was this government employee who'd actually made some money in real estate, but lost it all in the Great Depression. And he was just really distant and unsupportive. It's fascinating because his adopted dad actually chose the name Ellison because of Ellis Island, where he first entered America.
That's such an interesting detail about his name.
Right? And there's this whole other layer about his religious upbringing that's super interesting. So, even though he was raised in this Reformed Jewish household and his parents were really regular synagogue goers, Larry was always kind of skeptical. When he turned 13, he actually refused to have a bar mitzvah.
Really? That must have been pretty controversial in his family.
Oh, totally. And you know what's really fascinating about this? He later said that while he considers himself religious in one sense, he doesn't really buy into the specific dogmas of Judaism. He actually called them interesting mythology. And what's really interesting is that his connection to Israel now isn't even about religion. It's all about their tech innovation.
So, what happened with his education? I heard there's quite a story there.
Oh my God, yes. So Larry actually started out at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And get this, he was this absolutely brilliant student. They actually named him Science Student of the Year, which is just incredible, right?
But he didn't finish there, did he?
No, and this is where it gets really heartbreaking. See, he was in his sophomore year doing really well as a pre-med student when his adoptive mother passed away. And it completely derailed everything. He couldn't even bring himself to take his final exams,
That must have been devastating for him.
Totally devastating. But here's what's interesting. After that, he kind of went on this journey of self-discovery. He spent the summer of '66 in California, and then he tried one more shot at formal education at the University of Chicago, studying physics and mathematics.
Is that where he first got into computers?
Yes. And this is such a pivotal moment, right? Because at Chicago, he had his first encounter with computer design, and it just clicked for him. But the really fascinating part is what happened next. He just picked up and moved to Berkeley, California, and that's where his whole programming career started.
What kind of work was he doing in those early days?
So he started working as a programmer for different companies. And you know what's really interesting? He was basically teaching himself everything as he went along. He had this incredible natural talent for understanding computers and programming, even though he'd never formally studied it. And this was all happening during this amazing time in tech history, right at the beginning of the whole computer revolution.
So, tell me about how Oracle actually got started. I mean, where did it all begin?
Oh my God, this is such an incredible story. So right after working at Ampex Corporation in the '70s, Larry gets this amazing opportunity. He's working on this database project for the CIA, and get this, they actually codenamed it Oracle. And that's not even the best part.
What happened next?
So Larry comes across this paper, right? It's by this brilliant guy named Edgar F. Codd about relational database systems. And it completely blows his mind. And he's totally inspired by it. So in 1977, he takes this massive leap and starts software development laboratories with two partners.
Must have taken a lot of capital to start something like that.
That's the thing. You're not going to believe this, but they started the whole thing with just $2,000. And get this, $1,200 of that was Larry's own money. Like, can you even imagine starting what would become this massive tech giant with such a tiny investment?
How did they turn that into Oracle?
So this is really fascinating. They renamed the company to Relational Software in 1979 and then released their first product, Oracle Database. But here's something really interesting. They called it version 2 because like nobody would buy version 1 of anything,
That's pretty clever marketing.
right? But then, oh my goodness, they hit this massive crisis in 1990. See, they had this really aggressive sales strategy where they were basically booking future sales in the current quarter. And when those sales didn't materialize, they had to lay off like 10% of their workforce, about 400 people.
That sounds pretty serious.
It was absolutely devastating. They were literally on the brink of bankruptcy. They had to restate their earnings twice, deal with these huge class action lawsuits. Larry actually admitted later it was just this incredible business mistake. But you know what's amazing? They managed to turn it all around. Like they learned from their mistakes and came back even stronger.
What was the turning point?
Well, they got really lucky in a way. IBM was kind of dragging its feet about entering the Unix and Windows database market, which left this huge opening for Oracle. And even though they fell behind Sybase for a while in the early 90s, they just kept pushing forward, kept innovating, and eventually emerged as this absolute powerhouse in the database world.
So, Emma, let me ask you about Oracle's rise to the top. Like, how did they actually become this dominant force?
Oh my gosh, so this is where it gets really, really interesting. You know, after they survived that crisis in 1990, Oracle just started absolutely crushing it. Like, they got into this intense battle with this company called Informix, and it was crazy. Their CEO, Phil White, and Larry were like all over the Silicon Valley news for like 3 whole years.
What happened with Informix?
So in 1997, right, Informix announces this massive revenue shortfall and has to restate their earnings. And get this, Phil White actually ends up in jail. And then IBM just comes along and boom, absorbs the whole company in 2001. It's like one less competitor for Oracle to worry about.
Seems like Oracle was making some big moves during this time.
Oh my God, yes. Like this is when Larry really starts flexing his muscles in the industry. In 2009, they make this absolutely massive move. They buy Sun Microsystems after this intense bidding war with IBM and HP. It was like a total game changer because it gave them control of Java and this super popular open source database called MySQL.
How much was Oracle growing during all this?
The numbers are they're mind-blowing. By the mid-2000s, Larry's compensation packages were just astronomical. Like in 2007, he earned over $61 million. And in 2008, it was nearly $85 million. Though, you know what's really interesting? In 2010, he actually agreed to take just $1 as his base salary.
What about the competition? Who were they up against?
So by this point, Oracle's main competition was really just like IBM's DB2 and Microsoft's SQL Server. But Oracle had this incredible advantage because, and this is key, they had this massive installation base in big enterprises. And Larry, he just kept making these strategic acquisitions, right? Like they bought PeopleSoft, Siebel Systems, just kept growing and growing.
What about their business strategy during this time?
That's actually super interesting because they completely changed their approach from those early days. They became really focused on like enterprise software solutions, cloud computing, and just building this complete technology stack. And Larry was he was absolutely relentless about innovation and staying ahead of the curve. It's like he wasn't just building a company anymore. He was building an empire.
You know what I find fascinating? Outside of the business stuff, what's Larry actually like as a person? Like, how does one of the world's richest people actually live?
Oh my gosh. So his personal life is just absolutely incredible. Like, first of all, he's been married 6 times and his romantic life has been quite the journey. But what's really fascinating is how he spends his money, right? Like this man knows how to live large.
What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
So his real estate portfolio is just mind-blowing. Like he has this absolutely incredible estate in Woodside, California that cost around $110 million. And get this, it's designed like this beautiful Japanese feudal architecture, complete with like this man-made lake that's over 2 acres. And then he just casually goes and buys multiple properties in Malibu worth more than $180 million.
Those are some serious properties.
Oh, but that's just the beginning. His car collection is just ridiculous. He's got this thing for exotic cars. Like he owns an Audi R8, a McLaren F1, and his absolute favorite is the Acura NSX. He actually used to give them away as gifts when they were still in production. Like, can you imagine just giving away supercars?
What about his other hobbies?
So this is where it gets really, really interesting. Larry is just super passionate about aviation and yachting. Like he's actually a licensed pilot and owns multiple aircraft, including, and this is wild, a decommissioned Soviet MiG-29 fighter jet. Though funny enough, the US government won't let him import it.
What's the deal with his yachting interests?
Oh my God. So he used to own this absolutely massive yacht called Rising Sun. We're talking 453 feet long, and it cost over $200 million to build. And he's super competitive about it too. Like his team, Oracle Team USA, pulled off what people call one of the greatest comebacks in sports history in the 2013 America's Cup. They were down 1-8 and somehow won 9-8. It's just incredible.
Does he have any unusual habits?
You know what's really interesting? For someone with such an extravagant lifestyle, he's actually super disciplined in some ways. Like, he completely abstains from alcohol and drugs because he says he can't stand anything that clouds his mind. And in 2020, he just packed up and moved to Lanai, the Hawaiian island he owns 98% of, just totally changed his lifestyle.
So, given everything we've talked about, what would you say is Larry's real legacy in tech and, beyond?
Oh my God, his impact is just absolutely massive, right? Like when you look at the modern business world, Oracle is just everywhere. Like literally almost every major corporation runs on Oracle databases. And that's all because Larry had this incredible vision back in the 70s about how data would become like the most valuable thing in business.
But what about his influence on other tech leaders?
So that's super interesting because Larry really created this whole blueprint, right? For how tech leaders could be these larger than life figures. Like before Larry, tech CEOs were these, kind of quiet corporate types. But he showed that you could be bold, competitive, and just totally unapologetic about success.
I've heard he's done quite a bit of philanthropy too.
Yes, and it's actually really fascinating because his approach to giving is just so Larry, like he's donated hundreds of millions to medical research. And in 2016, he gave $200 million to USC for this amazing cancer research center. But what's really interesting is how he does it. He's not just writing checks, he's like really strategic about it.
How so?
So he tends to focus on areas where he thinks he can make this huge transformative impact. Like the USC Institute isn't just doing regular research, it's trying to completely revolutionize how we approach cancer treatment. And he's also super passionate about supporting Israel, particularly their tech sector. He's given millions to various Israeli causes because he really believes in their innovative spirit.
And where does he stand now in terms of wealth?
Right now, he's like just mind-blowingly wealthy. We're talking about $194 billion, according to Bloomberg, making him the fourth wealthiest person in the world. And what's really incredible is that he's still actively involved in tech innovation. Like, he's not just sitting back on his wealth. He's still pushing boundaries, still making big moves in areas like AI and cloud computing.
That's pretty impressive for someone who started with just $2,000.
Exactly. And I think that's really what makes his story so powerful, right? Like, he went from being this adopted kid in Chicago to literally reshaping how the entire business world operates. It's an incredible American success story, but with this totally unique Larry twist to it.
When you really step back and look at everything we've covered today about Larry Ellison, it's just, absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it?
Oh my God, totally. Like we're talking about someone who literally started with nothing, right? And just built this absolute empire from that $2,000 investment to becoming like one of the most influential figures in tech history. It's honestly incredible.
And what really strikes me is that he's still going strong, isn't he?
Exactly. Like most people in his position would have just, retired to their private island, which he actually owns, by the way. But Larry's still out there, still innovating, still pushing boundaries. And that's just so perfectly Larry Ellison, right?
It's been another fascinating episode of Behind the Billions. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
And remember, if you enjoyed today's episode about Larry Ellison, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you all next week with another incredible story.